What's up? This is Dan Fradenburgh for FIGGERRIDOUT.com and funnelfixing.com, kind of. And today I'm here with Brian Briscoe, and we met on LinkedIn, but a lot of the conversation today is going to be about how he works at the Pentagon. That's cool, right?
You know, 20 years ago, I think I would have said, yeah, that sounds really cool. But then you get there and, you realize that you're in the middle of one of the biggest bureaucracies in the world. So yeah, it's cool. The building's cool itself, but I don't know, the going jokes, it kind of sucks the life out of you. There's lots of euphemisms. Some people call it the puzzle palace. It just, anyway, it is what it is. Let's put it that way.
That's awesome. That's awesome. But we met off of LinkedIn because we're both in multifamily, and also we're looking to expand our reach in LinkedIn. And I look forward to working with you personally and professionally as well. But one thing I do on this show, because there's a recurring theme of how does somebody get to where the expert is? Usually when we're talking about multifamily or real estate or stuff like that, that means like, okay, if you have no money, you have no friends, you have no family, how do you do it? Okay, so first of all, when it comes to the Pentagon, is it as simple as enlisting and just saying like, that's where I want to end up, or how does one get on a career path?
The Pentagon is one of these things. You have the rank structure. When you first come in the Marine Corps, they're going to put you at usually a fleet unit, so, a battalion or a squadron or something like that. So, the units that are, on tap to basically go fight in wars, and the rank structure is like a pyramid. I mean, in a general infantry unit, you've got a lot of, private first classes, lance corporals, fewer corporals, then even fewer sergeants. And then up at the top, you've got a lieutenant colonel, which is the rank I am right now. But, essentially, once you get high enough in rank, it's almost impossible to avoid either the Pentagon or somewhere in, what we call headquarters Marine Corps, which is, Pentagon and a lot of what's at Marine Corps base Quantico. So, yeah, I mean, for if you stay in long enough, you can't avoid it is basically what it is.
Okay. So the other thing too, I've been geeking out about this whole thing here. The other thing that I do in this show to help people who are just starting out is I get our guests to introduce themselves, and that way, they can gain more confidence in doing that. And I think it doesn't matter if it's a job interview or what it is. So can you go into a little bit more detail, whatever you're comfortable saying about yourself, to introduce yourself?
Oh yeah, sure. So Brian Briscoe, born and raised Salt Lake City, Utah. I ended up going to college at the University of Utah, got a couple degrees there, served a 2-year mission for my church, moved to Minnesota for a PhD program. And basically, as soon as I moved, September 11th happened, so that changed the course of my life. I mean, I think like a lot of people, it kind of pissed me off, and I had just gotten back from spending a couple of years overseas. And, one thing I learned while I was overseas is just an appreciation for our country, the opportunities we have. And so, you put September 11th together in a newfound appreciation, and, Brian Briscoe goes and joins the Marine Corps, right? So didn't expect to do it for 20 years. I've been doing it for 19 and change right now, but it just kind of happened. So along the way, I picked up a couple of single family homes. I was looking to invest in something, and be able to create, passive income essentially. And at one point, after having a handful of homes, I kind of realized, it wasn't scaling fast. I wasn't quite getting to where I wanted to get at the speed I wanted. And so I started looking into how to scale, and that brought me to multifamily. So, essentially that's a, 30,000 foot overview of my life. 2 years ago, decided to do multifamily, and since then picked up a couple of partners. We formed a company. We've got about 250 units right now, and another, math in public, 200 and almost 250 under contract right now.
Nice. Good stuff. Good stuff. So one thing that was surprising when you mentioned that you worked at the Pentagon, I was actually surprised that you're allowed to say it online. Well, I guess my real question though is that the only place that I got into where people felt like you should brag about it was my college. And so one of the biggest things about my college, of course, is the swag. So is there swag at the Pentagon?
Yeah, there's a gift shop there, you know, and quite frankly, the only times I've gone into the gift shop is when I'm there with other people, you know. So I think this is something that a lot of people do. You know, you move to a place and you don't appreciate it. I talked to somebody last week who's lived in New York City his whole life, and he says he's never been to the Statue of Liberty, you know. And you know, when every time we move anywhere, you know, we usually have some family come visit us, you know. So I think we've lived here in DC for 2 years, almost 3 years now. And our family's been to like the National Mall once, you know, twice. And it was when my parents came to town, and it was when my wife's parents came to town. So I think the Pentagon's kind of the same in a lot of ways. I mean, there is a lot of swag there. You know, you can buy yourself the Pentagon shirt and, you know, the pictures of the Pentagon, but typically it's a parting gift.
Right. Well, you are retiring. So are you going to like make your own swag, or do you figure it's that I worked for the Marine Corps for 20 years and defended our country at my post at the Pentagon, all I got was this lousy t-shirt?
You know, there's tradition. It kind of, what everybody does is gets themselves a shadow box where you put, you know, all your medals and everything else, you know, in it. And, you know, just a lot of things that are indicative of service. Typically you'll get a flag of some sort at your retirement, you know, which you can also put in a shadow box. Lots of certificates that come with it, you know, like one certificate from the president, you know, and I'm sure for me, he's going to, you know, wet ink sign it himself. It's not going to be the machine that signs it, you know, but for everyone else, I think it's a machine. You know, and then like comment on the Marine Corps gives you a certificate and such, but I mean, not personally, but you know, so there is a lot of stuff that can end up going on your wall at the end of your service. And a lot of times the people you work with will pitch in and get you some sort of gift. The typical one we do at our, where I work right now, is a matted framed picture of the Pentagon, you know, from the Pentagon gift shop. And, you know, it's got like a 3-inch matting around it where everyone will sign it and write a message to you. So yeah, I think when I retire, those will be kind of the things that I have, you know, a bunch of certificates, you know, shadow box, flag, and, you know, a big picture of the Pentagon.
Mm-hmm. That's really awesome. So yeah, I was doing the arithmetic somewhat. I didn't get precise, but you did end up mentioning that you're retiring next year, and I was going like, hey, that sounds like just after 9/11. So how long after 9/11 was it that you enlisted?
So I actually enlisted in May of 2001, about 4 months before the World Trade Center went down, and I was a reservist. You know, so I came in as a reservist. You know, part of it, like I said, was that newfound appreciation for our country.
Mm-hmm.
So I enlisted as a reservist. Part of it was it would add a little bit of extra money. It would I think this is kind of funny. I was in school for math.
Mm-hmm.
And I had an epiphany one day. You know, I was, we were at a department picnic, you know, where all the math professors were there, all the graduate students were there. And at this particular school, I kind of looked around and all the math professors were brilliant, absolutely brilliant people, but kind of socially inept. And the epiphany that I had was, if I do what they have done, I will become like they are. And that scared me. You know, I'm just like, oh my gosh, is this what I mean, I want their job. I don't want to be them, you know, is what I realized. And I started looking at other things, you know, and the reserves kept on popping up because it was like the exact opposite of sitting in a stuffy office, you know, doing math problems all day. So anyway, May 2001, I got into the reserves, you know, went to boot camp. You know, it was between getting my master's degree so I got my master's degree 3 days before showing up to boot camp. I mean, talk about your world getting turned around, just flipped on its head. But yeah, got out of boot camp, moved to Minnesota, World Trade Center went down, you know, so that's the full story, you know. And then there's a difference in the military between enlisted and commissioned. Mm-hmm. You know, the enlisted are, you know, typically the ones that, if you listen to what they say, they're the ones that do all the work, right? And the commissioned officers are the ones that form the leadership of the military, right? So, and it's not wrong. I mean,
yeah. I'm just laughing because I got a joke in here about that.
oh yeah. So the biggest difference in accessions or coming into the Marine Corps between enlisted and officer is a college degree, you know?
Right.
So I enlisted with a college degree. So when it came time to make a decision to go active duty, I decided to go to officer candidate school and commission and be a commissioned officer. So it was within a week or two after September 11th that I had all the paperwork in, and I was waiting for an answer back. And I've been active duty since January 2002.
Okay.
So it took a couple of months to go active duty, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, when you roll all my time together, you know, they take the gap between the end of boot camp and when I started active duty, kind of scrunch it all up, and when it adds up to 20, you can retire.
Okay, that makes sense. So the joke, just so I've said it, was I've heard non-officers say that basically, like when times get tough, you should shoot the officer and listen to the stars and let them take over. Is that the one that you heard, or have you got a better version of that?
You know, there's a lot of jokes like that. You know, some of them are like, you know, you ought to ask an enlisted man because he works for a living type stuff. You know, just yeah, a lot of jokes like that. And I think in some cases, you know, here's where it's true. You know, you get a brand new commissioned officer, you know, maybe 22 years old. He or she's graduated college. I think when I came in, it was more predominantly he, and you know, the tides are changing a little bit. So, you know, forgive me for the gender pronouns, but you know, he or she, you know, will have graduated college at age 21, maybe 22, spent, you know, 3 to 6 to 9 months going through military training. And all of a sudden they're in charge of, you know, somewhere between 30 and 60 people, you know, whereas a sergeant, you know, at age 18 goes to boot camp, and the sergeant may be the same age as the lieutenant, but the sergeant has, you know, 4 years or 5 years of experience, you know, working in the Marine Corps, you know, basically has a little more experience in some ways. So, I mean, that's where it comes from. You do have some, you know, brand new lieutenants that, you know, show up and they're just, you know, still wet behind the ear. You know, I hope I wasn't like that. I'm sure I probably was, you know, probably sure there was probably some lance corporals that had me in their sights, but, you know, end of the day, I think the officers, you know, really quickly after getting to the fleet, you know, will, you know,
Get their sea legs.
Yeah, exactly. Get the speed. So
Right. Yeah, it's funny because I studied engineering in school, and so I saw a lot of the same thing with engineers. Engineers are supposed to be the big experts and all that kind of stuff. But you know, if they're in a co-op or if they're fresh out, you know, like I had to help out while I was in engineering on the summer to like with. You know, like some construction and stuff like that. And of course, you know, like the expectations, oh, you're the engineer. No. It's like, no, I'm just a kid. Right.
Yeah.
But
it looks, I mean, I imagine in that field, you know, what looks great on paper versus what you can actually build is you know, like you want me to make, I can imagine that. You want me to make what? Okay.
Yeah. There's a big degree about that. I remember before I went in, I remember one of my friends said, "Oh, you're going to be an engineer now. You should just become a millwright because that's all that millwrights do is fix whatever the engineer screwed up." But you know, I don't know. Maybe it's a bit of sour grapes or whatever. But so one thing about me in general is I like oaths. And my friend, my best friend, he took a few years off of med school because he wanted to study the other ways of understanding the body, even if it didn't agree with the West and, you know, Western medicine and all that kind of stuff. He had to be absolutely sure because he was promising to do no harm. And I don't want to put too much of a point on it, but do all the branches of the military swear an oath? Is it to the Constitution or is it to the government of the United States?
It's the Constitution.
Okay, it is still the Constitution. Yep. Okay, cool. Yeah.
I solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
Right.
I mean, that's what it is. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So. That's what I thought. And, you know, I guess, well, I already mentioned not to put too fine of a point on it, but I guess, you know, there is a question in a lot of people's minds on, you know, what would the military do if an unconstitutional coup ended up happening, right? And I don't imagine that's something you can say too much about. So that's why I started with, you swear to uphold the Constitution, not the will of one particular person. Is that something you can comment on?
Yeah, and just theoretically, if something like that happens, support and defend the Constitution. It's not. I mean, the president is the commander in chief. The Congress holds the purse strings to the military, but the military as an organization is supposed to remain apolitical. There's civilian oversight built in, and the military leaders, basically give advice to the civilian leaders. The Department of the Secretary of Defense and the president, are the ones that are basically saying, do this, do that. So there is civilian oversight. And I would hope if there was some sort of coup, the military would basically stay out of it in a way, so, I mean, we see in a lot of countries, I'm a Latin American expert by trade, so Venezuela, that's a country where, the president of Venezuela has used the military to keep himself in power. I would hope that, our military leaders, if something like that came up, would just refuse and just say, absolutely not. We took an oath to the Constitution. Constitution says X, Y, and Z. And I mean, inside the Pentagon, there is, an army of attorneys, who are, constitutional law professionals. And, there's a lot of things that'll come down that they're looking at. For example, with COVID, there's a lot of things with COVID, and I was temporarily assigned to the COVID task force for a while. But there were a couple of things that came down from the government that sounded like using the military as basically lab rats, as for testing, and there are some laws that say you can't do that, and a lot of the military, that the lawyers, ended up, writing pieces up saying, hey, we can't do this because, we are essentially breaking law number umpty frats that says the military can't be used, for, drug tests or whatever. So, in that case, the military leaders came back and said, hey, we can't do X, but we can do Y, So, I would hope that in a constitutional crisis, the military would look to the Constitution and not to the leaders.
Yeah, me too. I've studied a few different constitutions. So you mentioned that you served abroad, or sorry, no, it was you were that was with your church. You you didn't mention what part of the world you were in. Is it okay to mention that?
Yeah. For my church, I spent 2 years in Chile. With the military, I lived 3 years in Okinawa, 1 year in Brazil, a couple of deployments to the Middle East, Iraq, Afghanistan, and, boats floating around in the bodies of water in the Middle East. And about 3 months in Mexico City too. So those are the kind of the big, foreign, outside of the U.S. borders deployments that I've done. And I think, added up, it's probably around 7 years outside of the U.S. In addition to those big long deployments, I've spent, maybe 2 months in Korea, a month in Australia, a couple months in the Philippines, just doing various exercises, and somewhere around 35 countries. I'd have to, take my socks off to be able to count that high.
Right.
So,
wow, that's really awesome. So this background here, this is also a green screen here, but this is out back of my last apartment when I lived in Taiwan. I lived in Taiwan for 15 years, and actually it's kind of funny that there are a couple things to make this nicer. One is there was actually screen in this window here and this window right here, so I photoshopped it out because it was ugly. The other thing is it was the 8th floor, so I actually had to reach my camera outside to take the picture, and then I photoshopped it in again because
the window.
Yeah, I'm not washing that window and hanging out there just to get a nice background. There's no way. So, and it's also deliberately out of focus because that's how, the nice pictures go. Yeah. So it's funny. So I have a bunch of time living abroad as well. And you had a nice quick one-liner about that whole process for you. And the one for me, I ended up going to Taiwan because I'm a Buddhist. And the one thought that really pushed me over the edge to say, yeah, I'm going to go for it, was that I feel you don't know who you are unless you also know who you're not. And so that's a big one for me when you go out and abroad. So what are some things that you took away from your experience all over the place? Like you said that you realized how lucky you are to live in America. Now, like, was that because just about anywhere you go, just this is for the audience, you in the camera there, anywhere you go, chances are, like, well, outside of Europe anyway, everybody's going to be making far less per year than you will in, like America or Canada or the UK, someplace like that. So there's a certain difference in the lifestyle that way, but I think that there's a huge cultural difference. But what are some of the things that pop out to you that are most valuable?
So I was born and raised in, a middle-class neighborhood. My dad was a blue-collar worker, and, my parents did everything they could to put us in the best neighborhood and the best schools, so, I was the poor kid in, a very nice, middle-class neighborhood, right?
And in
And
those schools, before you go
Mhm.
on, sorry, in those schools, what was the most valuable part of that? Because for me at my college, which was an Ivy League college
Mhm.
for Canada, I think the importance of going to the best schools is not so much what you learn when you're there. It's who you meet and who you get to be around. That's what
Yeah.
I took. What about you?
I wish I was that smart when I was that age, but I wasn't. I was really looking more at the education than the people. I hadn't quite grasped the idea um, of how everything's relationships. So I was going to school thinking about more information I learned is going to help me, and not so much the relationships. So I had fun with friends, but when I got to college, it was just straight up, I need to push through. But so I did a year of college before going on my mission, and I had a full academic scholarship. Those don't really exist anymore, but the University of Utah paid for my tuition. So I basically went to school for free. Um, and because it was an academic scholarship, I had to maintain a certain GPA, and I didn't try very hard. I wasn't even close to my potential. So I lost my scholarship year one.
Mm.
And at the end of the first year, I'm like, yeah, you know what? I'd always planned on going on a mission for my church anyway. So I'm going to go on my mission, and I'll figure it out when I get back.
Hmm.
All right. So, and what I realized, spending 2 years in northern Chile, is what an opportunity I had. In northern Chile, you had to be like the top of your class to even be considered for a scholarship. And I graduated somewhere in the top quarter.
Hmm.
You know, um, but even if you were the top of your class, if your family couldn't afford it, you basically had no opportunities.
Right.
So I saw, what I realized was the poverty cycle, and it was long before I read about any of that stuff in school, but in my mind, I realized that there was a poverty cycle, and a lot of it had to do with, this was the average life, girl and boy go to school, the schools are pretty crappy, they're, 17-year-old boy, 16-year-old girl, hook up, get pregnant. Boy drops out of school, girl drops out of school, boy goes works in the mines to support his family, and he's gone for 4 weeks, home for 5 days. So what I saw is that cycle just repeating itself over and over and over. When the main employment source in northern Chile was either the mines or the ocean. There was fisheries, and there were mines, and there
Mm.
wasn't a whole lot in between. So there weren't a lot of high paying jobs, and it was just cycles of poverty, and people would just have, it was almost impossible to get out of those cycles of poverty. So what I realized is that I had thrown away, or nearly thrown away, almost a golden opportunity where, I had absolutely free education because of the grades I had in high school. So, I learned a lot more about life in those 2 years than I had in the previous 20,
Mm.
so, um, at the same time, I saw people that were dirt poor that were happier than the average American family, so,
Mhm.
I learned quite a bit. Number one, we have so many opportunities here that just don't exist in other countries. And number two, money doesn't buy happiness. You know, you can be happy with absolutely nothing. You know, I think, you know, Thanksgiving season right now, that's something that we should all remember is, you know, just be grateful for what you have. Yeah. So anyway, I came back to the US, and, you know, one of the first things I did is I went into the scholarship office, and I'm just like, hey, so I didn't get the GPA I needed for my scholarship. Is there anything I can do? You know, and I remember talking to, you know, a woman, she was probably in her 40s, and, you know, me being 21, I thought she was ancient, but, you know, sat down with her, and she said, you know, you were close enough to the limit that we can put you on probation for a semester. You know, and I was jumping up and down on the inside. I may have jumped up and down on the outside too. I don't remember that, but I'll tell you that the change in me was dramatic. You know, since that moment, I got a bachelor's degree and 2 master's degrees, and I didn't get quite a 4.0, but I have gotten literally all A's since. I've never gotten a B. I've got a couple of A minuses, but it was just one of those that, you know, I realized that the education can unlock so many opportunities, and, you know, we have the opportunity to get higher education. It doesn't matter who you are. You've got an opportunity here that people in other countries don't. So that was kind of the biggest thing and the first thing that I learned. And, you know, a lot of world travel after that has just reinforced the same concepts.
Mm-hmm. There's a book that I read. It was recommended by Bill Gates. It's called Factfulness by Hans Rossling. Have you ever heard of it?
Nope.
Nope. Okay. So the neat thing about that is it's a statistics guy, and the entire book is to basically show people that your preconception of how the world is accurate as of like 1970 something. Basically, everybody, actually, especially the most educated people, apparently they scored the worst on the surveys. You know, one example question would be, what % of women in the world can read? Mm-hmm. And the options were like 20%, 40%, 60%, 80%, or something like that. And the better educated you were, the more likely you were to give the wrong answer. And so apparently I think it's like around 80% now on Earth. You know, as far as like, you know, like paved roads, like I can admit it now. When I was on the plane, like I was in such a rush to get to Taiwan because my friend was in a hurry, like he needed my help. And so when I was actually on the plane looking at the map, I think I actually thought Taiwan was Sri Lanka. I thought it was on the other side. I thought it was
big islands off the coast of heavily populated countries. So, you know, there's a lot of similarities.
Yeah, true.
Yeah,
exactly. So
until you get there.
Exactly. But back then I didn't even know how to say hello or anything like that. How were your languages when you went abroad?
Oh, geez. This is kind of fun. You know, so I had 5 years of high school Spanish, right? And I was in the AP Spanish class. I did not take the AP Spanish test. Okay. But, you know, so, and then the church puts you through like a 2-month crash. I think it's 2 months, but 2 months crash course where you're eating Spanish, drinking Spanish. I mean, you're doing Spanish as much of the day as you can. I remember on the airplane between Miami and Santiago, Chile, I remember listening to a bunch of girls talk, you know, probably 3 sisters, you know, maybe 8, 10, and 12. I turned to the guy next to me and I said, what language are they speaking? He's like, that's Spanish.
Uh-oh.
I'm like, doesn't sound like Spanish. He's like, well, it's Chilean Spanish. He's like, but it is Spanish. I'm like, you know, so that was it. I mean, when I got there, people spoke so fast, and, you know, Chilean way of speaking, they drop certain consonants, and, you know, like the D's and the S's are almost never pronounced, you know. Right. So los pescados would be the fish in Spanish. And, you know, los pescados ends up being lo pescado.
Lo pescado. Oh, wow.
Yeah. And as a missionary, the funny thing is, you know, pescado is fish, pecado, take the S out, is sin, you know? So, you know, as a missionary, you're talking about sins and repentance and things like that. But, you know, I remember being in a conversation where a guy was talking about fishing the whole time. And I thought I was listening to a conversation between, you know, the guy that I was assigned with and this guy. And I thought they were talking about, repentance and sins and everything else. Turns out he was talking about fish, los pescado. I mean, lo pecado, lo pecado. But so
funny.
I would say I walked around the first 3 months in kind of a haze. I had a notebook in my pocket, and I would start recognizing one or two words just repeated over and over again. And I remember when I'd recognize a word, I would write it down and I would ask somebody. The problem was, most people were, I didn't have another English speaker to ask, so people would, play charades with me until I thought I understood it. And, get home in the evening, look it up in a dictionary. I'm like, whoa, that's not even close to what I thought it was. But
Right.
yeah, it went slowly. But by the time I was done, the DoD has a language test, and I do pretty well on that test in Spanish. So near fluency, nowhere near Cape native, but
right.
Fairly fluent is where I got to.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Yeah, in Taiwan we had a lot of people from the Mormons, Church of Latter-day Saints, and the white people among us. We were like who weren't missionaries. We were always jealous because their Mandarin was so good. Their Mandarin was so good. And I did a little bit of studying, self-study when I was in Taiwan. But my biggest thing is I didn't hang out with white people. And there was a very good reason for it, which is that when you first get off the airplane in Taiwan, the little disembarkation card at the bottom, it says the penalty for I think, I can't remember if it said trafficking or not, but it mentioned drugs or narcotics. It says the punishment is death. And so it's like, well, okay, it's the occasional J, that's not going to be happening here. And but that was the thing, is a lot of Canadians and Americans, they'd still keep up their habit with grass. And I heard horror stories of somebody getting picked up who they apparently went through his phone, and everybody who was in it got deported. And so I was like, well, I'm planning on making this a career.
I'm sober for a couple of years.
Yeah. It ended up being lots and lots and lots of years. So,
yeah.
But so I didn't even know how to say hello back when I first went there. They're very strict about those sorts of things. As far as the real trick that helped me learn Mandarin quicker was hanging around with Taiwanese people instead. And then the other thing, because I was a guitar teacher before I moved to Taiwan and was teaching English, I knew that the only way that I'm going to be speaking English is if the clock is on and I'm making money, or I really, really like you, because everybody is going to try and get it for free instead. And I'm not going to learn anything if that happens. So yeah, my record for Mandarin was explaining the theory of relativity, but that's enough about me.
Yeah. So you bring up some good points. If you really want to learn a language, and this goes for anything, you've got to immerse yourself. When I was in Chile as a missionary, I was in other people's homes, every single day, 8, 10, maybe a dozen different homes every day, speaking, Spanish with them. I lived in Rio for a year. And, they speak Portuguese there, not Spanish. And I did not learn Portuguese nearly as well in a year as I learned Spanish in a year, because, I went home every night with my wife and kids, and I was speaking English. And when I went to the consulate, everybody at the consulate was speaking English, and when we hung out with people, it was people that we met, State Department or other military from the consulate, and we all spoke English. So, you look at a year in Chile, what it did to my language skills versus a year in Brazil, there's no competition. I learned Spanish so much better. And even today, I'm a lot better at Spanish than I am in Portuguese. And it's been a lot longer since I lived in a Spanish speaking country.
So yeah, the other thing that comes to mind is you have to watch your own inner monologue. I find so I think one of the biggest hurdles that stops people from getting to fluency is because they think, in my head the only language is English. I'm not going to allow other language. No, that's not me. That's the other people language. No, you can't do that. You have to allow yourself to think in the other language if you're going to stand a chance.
I'll tell you, when I started learning Portuguese, I skipped a couple of steps that I had to go through to learn Spanish. And I think, once you learn a foreign language, the second one's easier. So when I started learning Spanish, pick a word, I don't know, madre for mother.
Madre, yeah.
In my mind, I would hear the word, I would translate it to English.
Yes. You have to stop that eventually.
And it took me a couple of years, a long time to stop that in my mind, just to hear the word and understand it. When I learned Portuguese, I never had to go through the translation from Portuguese to English or Portuguese to Spanish ever. I learned a word and I just associated the word with the thing or the action. And so, learning my second language, there's different ways of comparison. I wasn't as immersed in Rio as I was in Chile, but because I already learned the language, I was able to pick it up a lot faster in those times that I did have there. So I think, I don't know. I don't know if there's a switch in your brain somewhere that just turns on and says, language switch on, language switch off, but I turned mine on.
Well, I had a problem with that because, obviously English is more closely related to Spanish than Mandarin is, and Mandarin is freaking weird. Okay, as far as the grammar goes and all that kind of stuff. So one problem I had, because I learned I had to take French in school because I'm Canadian, and but it was awful. It was really, really bad. It's like I used to give the example of I knew the word passé composé. Okay, which is a form of past tense, right? But if you held a gun to my head and said, make a sentence in passé composé, or you got to say bye to your entire family, I'd have to say, guys, I love you. I'm sorry. Yeah. Because I can't do it. And that's an example of when language is taught the wrong way. You shouldn't even learn linguistic terms in a language that's not your native one, but I noticed I'd have two modes in my head. I'd have English mode and not English mode. And one thing that's a total buzz about Mandarin is they have no word for yes, and they have no word for no. Okay? And so what they'll do is they'll use the verb they'll use the verb instead. So are you crazy? The answer would be are. Okay, or am in that case, but they don't even conjugate either, right? But well, actually, it's not a conjugation; it's if it's a pronoun. But anyway, so they wouldn't have, and if it's not, it'd be is not, and then do you have a dog? You'd answer have or don't have. You wouldn't say yes or no. So my problem going to Spanish is that I'd naturally answer in my not English way, and I'd forget that I could say sí, or no.
That is so true. And fortunately, the two foreign languages jumbled in my brain are so similar that, so my language teacher at Defense Language Institute in Monterey told us one day, and I don't know if she made this number up, 55% of Spanish and Portuguese are exactly the same. So, in my mind, if I'm speaking Portuguese, and I can't think of the Portuguese word for something, I will just automatically throw the Spanish word in. And about 55% of the time, I'm right, and, on the off chances that I pick the wrong word, usually in context, people can understand what I'm saying, so, and that happens to me all the time as well, so especially when I started learning Portuguese, right now, I have to be deliberate. I cannot switch from speaking Spanish to speaking Portuguese, so, if I'm in a room with a bunch of, people who speak both languages, which in my current job happens, if I start speaking Spanish to somebody, I have fouled my ability to speak Portuguese for, at least a couple of hours, and vice versa. If I start speaking Portuguese to somebody, I'm not going to be able to get Spanish completely out of my mouth. Because it takes me a long time to flip the switch in my brain between I'm speaking Spanish now I'm speaking Portuguese. I can go from English to Spanish and English to Portuguese without a problem. But, flipping the switch between the two languages just doesn't work.
Right. So one of the biggest things before we move back to military things about languages, I find that when I've learned more languages, it's more difficult to offend me. just because like I do know, like, for example, with Mandarin, at first I thought the curse words were really funny, but then after a few years, you know, I'd start to react like a native speaker. I'd see a teenager walking through the subway with a potty mouth. I'd be like, oh, come on, can you have a little bit more class than that? And that's even before I had kids. But have you found that learning more languages changed your opinion on foul language?
Well, two points on that one. You know, language is very strongly associated with culture. You know, and that's something that I've learned. You know, I saw it, and you know, then I went to grad school and had these cultural classes, and a lot of things just kind of made complete sense. You know, my first week in Chile, you know, soccer is huge in Latin America, right? We're playing a pickup soccer game, and they're choosing teams just like you'd normally see, and they went around and basically said, I'll pick the fat guy. Okay, I'm taking the black dude. Hey, I've got the brown one. I got the tall dude, you know, Palito, you know, I got the tall skinny guy, you know, and they were using terms in English, you know.
You can't do that.
You can't do that. You know, hey, fat kid, come over and be on my team. You know, it's just like, those are fighting words. You know, but culturally it's different there. So I learned that, you know, there's a lot of things that we are sensitive to in our culture that other people are not, you know. You know, and that's one of the big things, that big takeaways I had. And there was a second thing, but I've already lost it. Anyway, So, but
that's still really awesome. I know what you mean as far as that goes. I know that with Spanish, one thing that they've done that's the opposite of what happened in English. Like, now there's no such thing as a stewardess; it's a flight attendant, and the reason is because a stewardess indicates the gender, and then women or those who would have had that label applied to them, they felt, well, I do the same job, so the title should not indicate my gender. Whereas in Spanish, like typically traditionally male-dominated professions like engineer, that was ingeniero, right? And then so some women have been using ingeniera for the exact same reason, but the opposite literal thing. They're adding the feminine ending, because they're saying, I'm a woman and I'm proud, I shouldn't have to hide it or feel like I'm doing a man's job.
And it's perfectly acceptable in Spanish to do that. You know, in English, I think there's a lot of shortcomings in our language that, you know, for example, the word man, you know, when you talk about man, are you talking about
humanity,
one person who is a male?
Yeah.
Are you talking about mankind? Are you talking about, you know, and a lot of these words, you know, tend to spark gender debates, you know, so I look at several different meanings of the word man. You could be talking about mankind. You know, so in my profession, you know, we just did the same thing with all of our job descriptions. You know, instead of an infantry man, it's now an infantry marine. But when you go back and you look at that word, you know, my dad was a postman, you know. Is it a mankind position or is it a male position? And I think that's just a shortfall in our language, where the two words are exactly the same thing, and it's not a gender thing.
Right,
you know, it's linguistics, and people don't understand the linguistics, and they get offended because, oh my gosh, you called him, you said the word man.
Did you just assume my gender? Right. Well, Mandarin's fantastic for it, because the third person singular pronoun, okay, which would be he, she, it, you know, that sort of thing. In English, in Mandarin, they're all pronounced exactly the same. They're written differently, but they're pronounced the same. So it's all ta, okay? And so the versions of ta, there's a male version, there's a female version, there's an object version, there's an animal version, and there's a deity version, okay? And they're all pronounced ta. So they've got it locked. And then if you pluralize it, you know, instead of, you know, them, you know, our plural third person pronoun is gender neutral, but for them it's just Taman, and it's the same thing, just add mun after it. So they've got that completely locked. So wow, bunch of linguistic stuff. This has been really cool. But back to the military in general. I'm not clear really. I'm not confident in my understanding of the difference between a Marine and people in the Navy. I understand that a Marine goes on land sometimes, and you guys also jump out of planes too. Is that right?
Some of us. I've never jumped out of a plane,
Mhm.
but when you look at different, I'll call them domains. You have air, sea, and land,
Uh-huh.
right? So Air Force, is air domain. Army, stays on the land. The Navy is, basically out in the sea. The
Yeah.
Marine Corps is basically operates where those three domains come together, and we call it the littorals, right? So we can function as a land army like we did in Iraq and Afghanistan. That's not really our purpose, so we are like a littoral combat
Hmm.
force. So think, Pacific Island campaign, storming the beaches. That was a very Marine Corps operation.
Hmm.
Now, Army did the same thing. They were also doing the island hopping campaign, and you look at the Saving Private Ryan's and shows like that where they're storming beaches at Normandy. That's the Marine domain, is
Hmm.
where air, land, and sea all come together. So
Hmm.
um, we can put a ship off the coast of any country, and it's in a way it's a diplomacy tool. Put a bunch of Marines on a ship, and you want to come down with a heavy hand as a diplomat, on a malign actor, which pick a country or organization or non-state actors, you know put a boat with a bunch of Marines out there, and it's just like, hey, I've got 2,000 Marines off of your coast right now.
Hmm.
Do you really want to push that button? And I think that's um, a kind of fair way to explain it.
That makes perfect sense. That makes perfect sense. So, because like one of the things I was thinking about, I guess since we were talking about linguistics, let's take this angle first.
Mhm.
One thing I've always admired whenever I speak with somebody in the military is the clarity of their expression.
Mhm.
You don't get a bunch of like $20 words. Well, at least if you do, they're standardized. But the main thing is like you speak to be understood.
Yeah.
And one thing that I haven't been able to get out of anybody yet, and I wonder if you're the person, like, can you think of anything systemically that helps that clarity of expression? Is it just repetition and you're around it all day and you're just parroting what your commander said, or how do people become clearer in the way that they speak and express themselves in the military?
We are very hard on each other,
Hmm.
especially in entry level training.
Hmm.
There's a term that I've heard, probably 1,000 times, and it's words have meanings. And make sure you're choosing the right words. And so from the very beginning, especially as an officer, so in enlisted boot camp, if you can immediately do what you're told, you'll make it through without a problem. It's like, I hear something, they tell me to do something, I'm going to do it immediately. If you can make that leap in your mind, you'll perform fabulously in boot camp. In OCS and the follow-on schools for officers, they're immediately putting you in leadership positions where the first thing you have to do is what's called a 5-paragraph order. So number one, we standardize a lot of things. So when we're telling the Marines what they need to do, we're following a 5-paragraph order format. So a lot of it is written in, and there's templates that we use to do just about everything we do. And if you're in a non-infantry role, you'll have a similar 5-paragraph order format, but there's certain parts that are pre-filled in for you. So a lot of it is just repetition. So if you're giving a 5-paragraph order, you already have the format. You already have, and we have a glossary of terms. Assault, attack, delay. That there's a lot of different verb choices we could use, and each one has a very specific definition. So we're just a little more deliberate, I think, when we're doing that, and we learn exactly what those terms mean, so that we're not, well, I said attack, but what I really meant is you have to, do this, or I said delay or fix or hold or disrupt. All those words have a very clear definition. Um, and so, when you're putting your presentation together or your order together, you're using the right words for it. So, yeah, so I think one thing the military does well is they simplify and they template everything.
Hmm.
So every Marine in the world knows, You know, you got an M16 service rifle and you have a jam. Every Marine in the world knows the 3-word ditty we have: tap, rack, bang, tap,
Mhm.
rack, bang, tap. I mean, that's what happens when, you know, something happens to your rifle. You know,
Mhm.
you tap the magazine to make sure it's fully seated. You pull the charging handle back and you
Yeah.
pull the trigger, and that should fix the problem. So it's we template everything and we practice everything until it's second nature.
Right, right. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, cool. So now one thing about this show that people who regularly watch will
Mhm.
know, I like to mix even parts, or at least, you know, but I have all this cerebral stuff, but I like some stupidity in there as well. And so here, and usually it has something to do with film or film
Mhm.
history or something like that. I'm coming to realize as I do more of these. But the movie, I think it was H.G. Wells, like it was originally a radio show
Mhm.
called War of the Worlds, you're
Mhm.
familiar with. And I remember hearing that the radio show, like, that scared the crap out of people when it first came out, because they thought that people, like aliens,
Yeah,
were actually,
really landed. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
And I remember hearing that when they made the movie, because they had that distinctive shape, like that kind of swan shape, I suppose, they had like
Mhm.
a flying saucer with a little, you know, or like a Loch Ness thing with a little eyeball cannon or something like
Mhm.
that. And I remember hearing that there was some sort of a discussion with the military, some consultation, and the military line on those exact ships were like, if it's shaped like that, it poses no credible threat.
Hmm.
And I don't, and like, I understand a lot of things, and like, I don't, because, like, you know, like from engineering, I understand that what you have, like an atomic weapon or something like that, that hits the vaporization point of
Yeah.
anything that we found, it'll vaporize. So like, that seems like a thing, but like, is there anything that comes to mind about that assessment of those particular
I would
statements?
go back to our culture discussion in linguistics, right?
Uh-huh.
I mean, our point of view is an Earth point of view, and we're familiar with Earth weapon systems.
Right.
You know, if somebody has the technology to go across the galaxy and come to us, their weapons are going to look a lot different than ours. I mean, if you compare what they did to every earthly weapon system, yeah, I mean, they're probably right, but
Mhm.
I mean, you got to imagine, with all the billions of stars out there, you know, there's some of them that are inhabited by intelligent life, and some of those are going to be far more advanced than we are. But if there exists, you know, interstellar travel like we see on the movies and whatnot, I've got to imagine that their shapes. I mean, some shapes are going to be dictated by physics, but
Mhm.
I can imagine that there's things that we just haven't seen before.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's what I was thinking as well. Of course, now as you say it, and just because, you know, I'm Canadian, we're known for being peacekeepers, and you work for the Pentagon, I guess it makes it a great place to end off here,
Yeah.
which is like, who even says they'd have weapons? If their
Mhm.
defense is good enough, then it's like, hey, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, yeah, it's completely conceivable if they have that kind of technology.
Yeah.
But I guess back to real estate.
Mhm.
I saw in your LinkedIn, your description, you primarily help people invest in multifamily. Is
Mhm.
there anything you want to say about that before we sign off?
Yeah, I mean, our process is simple. You know, we find people who want to invest in multifamily and help place their money into investment grade assets. You know, on the flip side of that, we're also looking for, you know, apartment buildings that are for sale and need a little bit of TLC. That's our basic plan. We buy apartments. We help people invest into those apartments. We fix them up. We give cash returns to our investors, and you know, all along the while, as the tides rise, so to speak, we'll cap in on all the appreciation after, you know, 3, 5, or 10 years, however long we hold the asset. So,
Okay, and so they should reach you through Four Oaks Capital.
yep, fouroakscapital.com is the website. You know, you know, when I'm not in the Pentagon and my phone's not in the box, I can usually be, you know, reached pretty quickly on LinkedIn as well. You know,
Mhm.
drop me a message on LinkedIn, go to the website. You know, those are all surefire ways to get in contact with us.
Awesome, awesome. And then also, because you work for the Pentagon, one last thing I like to
Mhm.
find out from anybody I interview is like, we met from LinkedIn and through the Impatient All Stars,
Mhm.
and so that's how we ended up meeting up. But one of the things I always ask when somebody comes in for an interview is, how much do you know about me? Because if you researched me, there's a lot of weird stuff.
You know, I